so much for being at our Portrait Perfect Art Discovery Series today. There are some people that I know that came in just because of this topic, all the way from Colorado. So welcome, and welcome to all of our friends viewing online. We're ready for a good, fun, rousing time here, right, Judy? Okay. So today's panel, and their artwork is in the order that they're seated, is Judith Dickinson from Colorado, Ted Nuttall from right here in Arizona, and Robin Damore from Washington, Vancouver, Washington. And we're all excited to kind of share some insights and behind the scenes to how they do what they do. So I'd like to start, I'll start with you, Robin, if you can just give them a little background, like how you got started painting and why portraits. What's your allure?
So, oh, it's on. Wow. I started painting when I was 45. I took my first painting class. I had been drawing for a couple of years before that and wondered if I could paint. And I took a 1-week painting class from a Russian up in Seattle he had flown in from Manhattan, and I was the only one in the class who'd never painted, and I had a complete meltdown in the middle of the class. And he called me after that class and he said, I can't believe you've never painted. You should come study with me in New York. And I had just sold a business, so my husband said, I will watch the children and you can go. So I rented a little apartment in Soho and went and painted with him for not that long. And he said, at the end of it, you could start to do commissioned work. So I came back, I rented a studio, and I started painting. And that was 22 years ago. And it's really the only kind of painting I've ever been interested in. I'm a very bad landscape painter. I suppose I could do still life if I was interested in it, but I really only care about heads and capturing personalities of people. And I'm a professional photographer. I was a photographer before I started painting. So that allows me to spend time with people, photographing them, and then using those photographs as the resource for my paintings.
Excellent, thank you. Ted, let's hear how you wound up in this beautiful portrait world.
Well, thank you for having me. I took my first watercolor class in high school and painted in both my junior and senior year of high school, and then never painted again until I was 40.
Hold that microphone closer.
And I, at 40 years old, well, actually, I was a little younger than that. I went to art school thinking I was going to become a painter, but I chickened out and became a graphic designer. And I studied graphic design and then had my own firm here in Phoenix for many, many, many years. And then when I turned about 40, I went through a really, really terrible divorce. And my mother, who was kind of a hobbyist weekend painter, came to rescue me from my crashing and burning. And the way she did that is she had me come she had me come to, that was the best part right there. She had me come to her studio and paint twice a week to get my mind off my troubles. And it really worked. And the funny thing is, for some reason, I started painting people, and I painted people twice a week. I would go to her studio and paint people. And that's how I got started painting. I gave up my graphic design firm, started painting and teaching full time. And I've never in my life painted a landscape, but I tell people that some of the best landscapes I've ever painted are people. And I feel like I really kind of approach the figure like I would approach a landscape or even an abstract painting. So at 50 years old, I sold my graphic design firm and started painting and teaching full time.
Fabulous. And some students of yours are here. Who
Yes.
else taken courses? You, Rob, anyone else? Okay, he's oh, there you go, another one. You have taught quite a bit at Scottsdale Artist School, among other.
Yeah, one of the other really wonderful events that happened in my life is I was a huge fan of a painter named Charles Reed. Many of you probably know Charles Reed. And I got to take a workshop from him at Scottsdale Artist School, and he was my hero. He was my mom's hero, and he was my hero. So I took this workshop from him at Scottsdale Artist School, and on the third day of the workshop, he came over to me and said, "You know, Ted, you should teach this." And he went into the director of Scottsdale Artist School and said, "You should hire Ted to teach here." And they hired me, and thus started my teaching career. So,
And can I say, as a testimonial, Ted is an incredible teacher. If you ever wanted to learn watercolor, he's the one to go to. I mean, he's really amazing.
and I paid her well to say that.
That's a very good endorsement right there. That, and we do love the Scottsdale Artist School. It's great asset,
Great.
a little gem here in Scottsdale. So, okay, Judith, let's hear a little bit about you.
Well, my background was very different from theirs. I always blame my art skills on my dad. He was the pastor of the church, and the only thing we were allowed to do in church, besides pay attention, was to draw. So I drew as soon as I was able to hold a pencil. And the only thing around you in a church mostly are people. So I would draw people all around me. And when I was 8, a guy saw me always drawing and asked my folks if he could show me how to oil paint. So we'd stand out by the lake and I painted landscapes, but I don't care for landscapes either. But anyway, and then I never could stop. So through all the years, I had several people that would see me doing art and ask if they could mentor me. So I had mentors, but never was able to take it in school. I got my degree in education, and I was already commissioned to paint the portrait of the governor of Colorado before I took my first workshop. So, but you know, lots of years of painting. And so it was just something. I was asked recently, how did you know you wanted to be an artist? I never went through that. I just always had art, and art was just part of my life. So
I bet some of those people that you did drawings of would love to have those now when you were a kid. And that's a great story. And I love that you stayed quiet and you drew. You didn't cause disruption at church. That's a good, it's a good asset. So, so Ted, earlier today you were in the office and we were talking about each of you have different ways of getting your subject matter. You both, Robin, you photograph pretty much all of your own people. You work from your own photographs and sometimes other people's not very good photographs. We'll talk about that later. But what I love about what Ted said earlier is you are a people observer, and you'll sit in a place like this and tell us about that inspiration.
Yeah, what I love most about doing what I do is I just really like people. I grew up in a military family, and we were always traveling and having to get to know people pretty quickly. And so I've always been a people watcher, and I love to sit in a coffee shop for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and watch 150 people or 200 people walk through. And in those 150 or 200, I might see one that I connect with. And I never really could put my finger on what that was that I connected with, but I could feel it. And I would either photograph them while they weren't looking, or I would approach them and ask them if they
A lurker.
yeah. And or I would invite them to come to my studio and let me photograph them. And what I find so exciting is that when I sit down to do the painting, after I've photographed them, I'm after that moment of expression or emotion that I saw on their face that day in the coffee shop, or when they're sitting for me in the studio. And sitting there painting is trying to evoke that expression and emotion that was in their essence, and then also trying to imbue the painting with how I felt the moment that I saw them and experienced that moment of expression and emotion. So I don't actually think of my paintings as who the people are or as portraits. I think of them as recordings of a moment of expression and emotion that just touched me and made me want to paint them. So
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And you did mention too that sometimes when you ask ask them if you can take the photograph, then suddenly you lose that moment because suddenly they're starting to think, oh, how did I do that? And I know you had a similar experience, but with the one that you're working on now, but it's just, to me, watercolor is definitely a challenging medium. And I met you last year, you came in and Robin introduced us, and I just loved everything. And the way you capture the moments, it really,
thank you so much. I've never tried another medium. It's always been watercolor. Oil painters will always tell me how terrified they are of watercolor, and I in turn tell them how terrified I am of oil painting. So
that's a good thing. So you're trying to capture people in a moment where they maybe don't know that you're capturing them. Robin, you have done stunningly beautiful portraits, and you always stage them for the photograph, and you do so frequently with things that have meaning to them. But you also are really good at getting that picture and helping them look natural. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're working on now?
So I'm working on this painting, which is in progress.
So you want me to get the
these
photograph?
three.
I'll get it.
Yeah.
You stay
Okay.
up here. I'll get it.
All right. So I went to their house to do the photography, and this little girl, from the minute I saw her, I wanted to paint her, and I was lucky enough that they decided that was a good idea too, and I knew that she could give me this look, but when I started to shoot her, she started to give me a look that she thought I wanted. So she started to, like try and be a model or something, and I shot several photographs of her, and she looked kind of cute, but I wasn't getting this look. And so what I said to her was, Penny, you are so perfect the way you are. All you need to do is just be you. You can let go of any kind of trying to do anything. And she's a really smart 5-year-old. And she goes, you mean like this? And then she gave me that look. And her brother, he got it too. I mean, I was just able to talk to them like they were adults about, look, I don't want cheese. I just want you to be who you are. And I spent an entire morning with them, photographing them. And we tried a number of different poses. And I used a large softbox as my light source so that it looks like we've got window light that's lighting them. So it's a directional light from one side. And it's one of the reasons that I have these really great catch lights in their eyes, which is one of the things I really look for, is a bright, like shaped catch light in the eye, because it's what gives it, for me, it's what gives any kind of subject a really great feeling of life, is if their eyes are alive. And if they've got a good catch light in their eye, it can really make you feel like, oh, this person has energy and life. And anyway, that was my process with these guys.
And you had a significant piece of artwork behind them.
I had a significant piece of artwork. Oh, the artwork that was hanging back behind them while I was shooting, I could see the edges of the painting. And so the photograph that you just saw is actually a Frankenstein of about 5 photographs. So I took the best hands, the best heads of each of them. And I photographed the painting separately and then photoshopped it in back behind them. So that I did not see the edges so that I could use it as the background for the composition. So the composition is pretty carefully decided just by taking the best of what I got in my photo shoot with them.
And also, it's put away now, but there was, the painting actually had the red went all the way through, but you took that out because we didn't want to take away from the.
Right, and the birds were over here. So I moved the birds over because it didn't work in the composition to have them over there. So I could pick and choose what to keep and what to get rid of in the photograph. I'm not doing a copy of a photograph. I'm using the photograph as the resource, as the inspiration for the painting. And you know, I think, I don't know if it's difficult to explain the difference, but I'm really not interested in copying photographs. I really want to create an original composition and something that's you know, completely different from what if you have a great photograph, you don't need a painting of it necessarily. You already have that. You know, the artist brings their own spin to whatever the composition, the final painting is a lot of reflection of who is painting it. So,
and you have done like, you always go to their location, like you'll fly.
right. I just did a trip where I went from, I live in Vancouver, Washington, which is essentially Portland, Oregon. So I went from Portland to South Carolina, to North Carolina, to Indianapolis, to Chicago, to New York, and I shot 15 subjects, did the resource photography, and then go back to the studio and paint, and then go back to the subjects and deliver the paintings. And I always do an unveiling. So I have like a ceremony, because for me, it's a spiritual experience. So it's all part of that tradition of mine of creating a spiritual connection with the subject and having them see it with me for the first time. And then hopefully I always, when I do a portrait, I always guarantee the likeness, and also that the client will be delighted with the painting, or they can't have it. So I need to know when I'm, you know, choosing a resource, that I can create that myself, and then I need to see it from them that's, you know, that I achieved that. Because people who are unhappy with your work become a terrorist for your brand out in the marketplace. So I'm just trying to prevent that.
We don't need that.
No.
No, and it was really just great fortune last year that I happened to be kind of passing by 2 different times when she was doing the unveiling, and managed to capture it on video. And I would say the instant thing that tells you is like, and that's what they did. And Maxine was so cute when you unveiled Maxine and Roland. It's all about Maxine.
Yeah. That unveiling that we did, she cried, and it was just a very, very sweet experience. And I was really surprised. We had, I don't know, 20 people that kind of gathered as we were getting ready to do this unveiling. And luckily she was very pleased.
All right. And Judith, you work you work a lot of different ways, but the commission after commission of sometimes very tricky photographs that you didn't get to take. Our friend Frank here, Mr. Rashapo, has given you some very challenging.
He likes the challenge.
Yes. And you have all different subject matters. One of the next things I want to toss out to each of you is going to be talking about how do you do this beautiful skin tones, because each of you are so unique, but it's just like beautiful flesh tones. So you don't have to talk about it now, but what experience do you like best as far as painting from the photograph or staging people or?
Well, I would always prefer if I could paint live, but that is not a reality very much anymore. And so, and I do a lot of children, perhaps animals. And so then working from photographs is the best way to do that. I think that my type of career is very different from Robin's because one thing most of you probably know that we work in Africa, and so my artwork supports us doing that. So always it's the stress of, making enough for that. And so I will often take projects that I think I will never be able to do this. And so, but then I too want satisfaction guaranteed, and so portraits are such a very special type of painting. I do other things as well as portraiture, but it's so special to work with a family or to a person. I've done many things where a person has passed away, and just the wonderful time that you have of being able to get to know in a very special way, where you would never get to know people like that. But when you are able to be part of their lives for a painting, it's very, very touching and very wonderful. I love doing that.
And how many people were in the one for Frank?
Oh,
Or the one thing?
I don't know. Probably the most I've done was 40 in one painting. So that hangs in our government building in Colorado, but it's We the People of Adams County, and it's got 40 people in it.
So I had another question, but it escaped me, so it'll come back later. But each of you really capture the essence of people, and I feel very honored having, in my opinion, some of the top portrait artists, and there's a lot of excellent ones, but I was going to ask who has inspired your work, and also, can you give us some insight about these beautiful skin tones? We'll start with you, Robin.
Well, I studied with a Russian. His name is Leonid Gurvitz, and he teaches at the New York Art Students League. And he taught for 20 years at the Leningrad Academy in St. Petersburg.
Super cool place, by the way.
Yeah, definitely. You get a chance to take a class there. Very, very wonderful. And he is very critical of my work. And I can remember the first painting, the first commission that I did, and I had been working on it for 6 months, and I knew it wasn't right yet, but I wasn't sure what was wrong with it. And I remember taking it to him and showing it to him, and he said, "This is dust." I was like, okay, well, I'll just go sit over in this corner here. So I think because I had such a strong critic in him, that he taught me, it's difficult. I'm sure you guys must find this. It's difficult to find people who can be critical of your work if you're doing something pretty good, and most people, would have a hard time. I hear from people all the time, I can't draw stick figures or whatever. So he having him as a critic really helped me. He also taught me how to paint skin tones, and also how to paint shadow. I don't know if you want specific paint colors or that kind of thing. I could certainly talk about that. I think one of the most ingenious color mixes that I've seen was one from a painter by the name of Jeremy Lipking. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he's kind of a wunderkind. And I took a class from him, and he took cadmium orange, which is like the brightest orange that there is. And he mixed it with Viridian green, which is a blue green, a very bright green. He mixed those two together and created this amazing shadow tone for skin tones, for Caucasian skin tones. And that to me was kind of a little miracle, seeing that for the first time. Now, Ted mixes all kinds of color and stuff. He'll talk about that, but into his shadows. So he's probably like, whatever. But I think the way that my skin tones come together is through a lot of very thin layers of paint. So it's a layer upon layer. This little girl here probably has 8 layers of paint on her face, and she isn't quite done. So easily, it's a layering that really gets me to a place where I feel like the skin is shiny and has a life to it. It looks like, there's blood running through it. And so there you go.
So our Crayolas with just one color never was going to do.
Not
trick.
so good. Not
Okay.
so good.
Okay. It's all in the blending, right? So what about you, Ted? I mean, you also have a fun technique with it's like a splash.
Yeah. Yeah, when I took this class from Charles Reed, I took this 1 week-long workshop from Charles Reed, and I was so inspired by the way he painted. But I knew very early on, or I began to develop this desire to paint watercolor differently than most watercolorists do. So I began this kind of self-teaching thing where I developed a process that eventually started to show these dots and drips and multiple colors in the skin tones and things like that. And so that was the main thing. I wanted to develop a process. So I developed a process that was a multi-layered process that was wet on dry painting, and layers and layers and layers. And I think a lot of the glow that I get in the skin color happens because of this layering that I do. The other thing that I did very early on is I found because I was an inexperienced painter, I would find that if I had a color photograph and started painting it, I felt compelled to copy the photograph. And I immediately knew I didn't want to do that. I wanted to interpret it somehow. So I immediately stopped using color photography and started working from black and white. So all of these paintings are done from black and white photographs, so that frees me to do whatever I want to do with color in the face. And so I have this process of throwing color in sometimes where it doesn't belong. And I call that arbitrary color. I just arbitrarily decide to put green on the nose or purple on the chin or something like that. And then I also wanted to introduce an aspect of abstraction and maybe impressionism in my work. So the little dots that you see the little color dots that you see in my work are kind of that leaning toward impressionism and abstraction, really. And then one more thing I want to throw in, I midway through my career, I visited the Brandywine Museum in Pennsylvania, where Andrew Wyeth and Jamie Wyeth and N.C. Wyeth show their work. And I remember looking at, with my nose up to Andrew Wyeth's paintings, looking at how he painted. And I made a note to myself in my iPad, more layers, more transparent. 6 months later, I was in Dallas, Texas, at a retrospective show of Richard Diebenkorn's work. And any of you who know Richard Diebenkorn was an abstract expressionist painter. And at the end of the day, I'm standing in front of one of his giant abstract paintings. And I make a note to myself, more layers, more transparent. So I was gleaning the same thing from Andrew Wyeth's work as I was from Richard Diebenkorn's work. And I was even more determined to create more of that luminosity in my work. So I went about trying to achieve that goal as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a master class right there. More layers, more transparency. And all of you do layers and layers and layers. And when I was walking by Robin's studio the other day, I'm like, oh, your palette is so neat. And it's not the neatest palette I've ever seen, but it was, definitely like the small paint, small amounts of paint, and you carefully mix, and it's the layer and layer and layer. And I think a lot of people, especially at first glance, when you're looking at art, you don't necessarily see that, but I guarantee you every masterpiece in every museum has exactly what you said. The luminosity comes through multiple layers and color. What about you? Who inspires you? Well, you just mentioned two, I guess. Yeah.
I find myself inspired. I have very eclectic taste in art. I like abstract art. I like impressionistic art. I like photorealism sometimes. And I find that I glean things from observing all of those, mostly just inspiration. And I don't know, you get jazzed when you see beautiful work, and there's so many beautiful painters in the world. So I'm inspired by a lot of different people, all the way from Richard Diebenkorn to Andrew Weil. So,
Judy, how about you?
Well, my early influences in art was, because I was not surrounded by any art, was the Norman Rockwell with the magazine. So I would copy everything that he ever did. And so that was my early education. And I have so many favorites through the years. I was able to study under Tony Ryder, who was great, and David Casson, just workshops. After I had a full-time career, I was able to take those workshops. And also I would say art magazines were a huge part of my education. When I never had access to anything, I could read every word of the art magazines. And so I really developed a lot from that. What are we talking about? Skin tones? Yeah. So I do the same thing, many, many layers. I'm not into formulas. Every skin, I do a lot of our African children's skin and African adults. And everyone, depending on the lighting and everything, they're all so different. So I never start a piece with certain formulas. I'm sure I go to certain colors first to start, but when I teach, I have more and more thrown out formulas than created formulas, because to me, that's why I love portraits. Everybody's face is so different. And even if it's twins, they're going to have, differences that are just so amazing, the variety. And so anyway, that's the way I do it.
We happen to have twins in the tent, Susie and Roxy.
oh, yeah.
And one of them has a crooked smile. Otherwise, you have to really like I have to. Hi,
Yeah, you can say.
Susie. I get it right 50% of the time. They would be great to paint. So every year for the last several years, there's been a little challenge that goes on in the tent. And Judy's the one that kind of sets the tone for that. And an example of that is right behind me. So was this last year? Last year was John Linton. And we had about 20.
I don't know if we had that much, but
18, fair amount of artists that all took part in this John Linton project. The year before it was Tony Barbano. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because it's just really fun the way we love seeing how all the different artists interpret things in such a different way, translating the beauty of the human figure in different ways.
yeah, for about 6 years, I've picked a different artist that intrigues me, and I would paint their portrait. And usually Bruce, he's my neighboring artist, he would do the same in his style, which is very loose. And so it was always fun. And then the last maybe 2 or 3 years, other artists have said, well, we'd like to do that too. So it was neat. Even we had a jeweler who created Anthony out of jewelry. And so this year we picked Gideon. And so I already started the drawing today, and Gideon's really scared. But anyway, so you can watch throughout the whole show, you'll see, and hopefully Ted at least will do.
We'll do a blog post on it.
Yeah,
Sure.
there'll be at least 10 artists that'll be working on Gideon.
And it's kind of like, where's Waldo? You go walking around, you go, hey, wait, there he is again. There's and Kathy Sheeter, who's one of our primarily does animals. She did a chimpanzee. What did she do? A goat. She did John Linton as a goat. It was so cute. And then Sarah Phippen actually did. He was in here a minute ago, but I think he's wandered back to his studio. But Sarah Phippen did his hands because he's got always this great turquoise jewelry, and there's some tattoos. I bought that one. It was just so different. So I digress. But okay, let's talk about some of your most fun and favorite projects you've done. How many of you have had a portrait of yourself done, painted? 1, 2, 3. Okay. 4, 5. Yeah. Gary, does Judy paint you? Okay. Husband, Judy's husband. So we were completely surprised one year and overwhelmed by some of the artists got together and wanted Judy to do a portrait and surprise Jake and I. And it's kind of intimidating. And you know what Jake said? Well, after we're gone, at least people will know we were real. And I'm like, okay. But yeah, there's something, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, wow. And she does make you look really good. Yeah. So that was a special thing. Thank you. But do you have any like favorite projects, or I know you have subjects that you like to paint over and over, and each of you, I mean, anything just really jump out at you?
I've had some crazy ones through the years. One comes to my mind. I had two, and it was a huge painting. And so it was of Anne Boleyn before she was guillotined, or whatever the word is. And so she's leaning over. I don't know if these people had just watched the movie. So it was a huge painting. And so it's this woman in the, big dress, and there was a black cat in the back. And the woman had me paint her face into the painting. So the body was Anne Boleyn about to be killed, and it's the wife that's sitting there. And it hangs in their living room, and they love the painting. It's like, who knows? That was probably one of the most bizarre I've had to do.
Scary. That's scary. How about a happy one?
I've had lots of happy ones and scary ones. My scariest was Judge Judy has commissioned me for 3 paintings. And so Judge Judy is exactly the way she is in her program when you talk to her. But my husband calls her my dear. I call her your honor. But so she's commissioned me 3 times. So those are pretty scary. But I don't know. What's our, what? Oh, should I tell? So she wanted a painting. The second one I did for her was of her son, and she wanted it for his birthday. So there was a real close time frame. She wanted it in 2 weeks. And so to have it, varnished and framed and ready to go. So she said, so my husband was talking to her, and he said, whoa, I don't know, time frame. And she said, oh, don't worry, I'll send my jet to pick up the painting. So her jet came from Florida, where she has 2 full-time pilots with her jet, came from Florida to Colorado to pick up the painting. The 2 pilots called it the art heist because they had no idea what this was. So then they flew to California to pick her up, and then flew to Wyoming to where her son was. So and I had worried that maybe my husband had charged a little bit more. And he goes, do you know how much that cost to do that?
Charge, yeah. That's a good story. All right. Ted, any all-time favorite experiences?
I can tell you one of my scariest, or several of my scariest experiences has been painting myself. And I've done 4 or 5 self-portraits, and it's always interesting to me that someone that I don't know ends up buying them and hanging them in their living room. So I'm hanging in people's living room, you know. And people often ask me if it's different painting yourself, and I don't really find it different. I'm just painting another face, you know. But one of the most meaningful paintings that I did was my mentor that I mentioned, Charles Reed, who I just idolized my whole life and was really responsible for a lot of my growth in my painting life. I photographed him one time when we were having dinner together, and he was being interviewed by a magazine while we were having dinner together. And so I just asked him if I could take pictures of him. And I took a great picture, showed it to him, and he really loved it, and especially the way I composed it. But I never got around to painting it until after he passed away. And he passed away just a couple of years ago, and I was really heartbroken. And doing this painting of him was kind of catharsis for me to do this painting. And I have it hanging over in my space. I'd love for you to come and look at it. It was really it was such a risky composition that his wife hated it, but he really liked it a lot. So that was an interesting experience. It took me a while to work my way through that one because I wanted it to be perfect. You know, I just idolized him so much. So
what a great honor and to capture that memory. It's great. How about you, Robin?
Well, in my booth, there are a couple paintings of Nichelle Nichols, who was Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, and she's 84 in the paintings. And I met her when she was 72. I was hired to photograph her for a book, and I liked one of the photographs that I took of her so much that I painted her. And I showed the painting to her sister, and she said, well, she won't like the painting because of how her neck looks in the painting. And I had done the painting for me, not for her. And so I didn't show it to her. And then like 10 years went by, and you know how much you like pictures of yourself 10 years later? You know, you look at yourself and you go, wow, what was I complaining? I looked pretty good then. So anyway, so she was going to be in town, and I called her sister and I said, hey, you know, she's going to be here. You probably don't remember me. She goes, yes, I remember you, and I remember the painting, and I remember what I said about the painting. And I said, oh, okay. Well, she said she will love that painting now. And she said, the thing is, she has had a slight stroke. And so she doesn't have any, she has no short-term memory. So she's very different from who you met when she was 72. So she came to my studio, and I unveiled the painting to her, and she cried, and it was just like the best response. And I had brought dinner into the studio. We sat down to have dinner, and she said, oh, is there a painting? And I said, yeah, let me unveil it for you. And I unveiled it to her 6 times that evening. Each time she saw it for the first time, it was very sweet, bittersweet kind of thing. And then we did another photo shoot. And she loved those paintings, and I delivered a painting to her house, and she again saw it for the first time at her house down in California. And then she offered the prints of that painting that are in my studio now. She offered prints of those on her website, and we would both sign them, and we became friends, not like sleepover friends, but you know, we hung out. And she passed in October, and the Smithsonian had contacted me about the painting about for the National Portrait Gallery. And it had gone through a process of where the historians, a group of historians at the museum, have to agree that she's worthy, the subject is worthy of the museum, and they did that. And then they said, well, we'd only want a painting of her when she's at her most famous. And I'm like, well, that is now, there's generations of fans that she has. So anyway, I'm in a discussion with them about acquiring that painting, and that's a stay tuned. We'll see what happens with that. That would be a really great ending for that painting, is for it to end up in a place where there's mostly older white men. So to have an older woman, a Black woman, would be really, poetic justice. So it'd be a good thing.
And she was a trendsetter's not the right word, but
Yeah, she was amazing. She, if some of you, if I've talked to you, you may have heard me tell the story, but she told me this story about after the first year at Star Trek, the first season, she wanted to leave the show, and she to Gene Roddenberry, and she said, "Yeah, I'm gonna leave." The racism at the studio was very, very rampant. She had to use a separate gate to go into the set, and he said, we love having you on the show. Would you take the weekend and think about it? And she said, fine, okay. And he gave her a couple of tickets to the NAACP gala that was happening that weekend. So she went to the gala, and they came to her and said, there's somebody here that wants to meet you, a big fan of yours. And she's like, okay. And it was Martin Luther King. And he said, Corette and I are huge fans of the show. It's the only show we let our little girls stay up and watch. And she said, well, I'm glad you're a fan, but I'm going to leave the show. And he said, you can't leave the show, not because of the people who love you, but because the people who hate us. And so she ended up staying with the show, and she also then worked to recruit diversity into the ranks of the astronauts. They called her after the show in NASA and said, we'd like for you to basically do a tour and help us recruit astronauts of color and women. And she said, no, I played an astronaut on TV. I'm not gonna kid anybody. And they said, no, you don't understand, what you represent. And so she said, all right, I'll do this, but if you can't find any women or people of color who are qualified, if this has all been an exercise in tokenism, I will bust your ass in the press. And she ended up recruiting the first women and the first people of color as astronauts, and has been honored by Obama in the White House. And she was just an extraordinary human. It was a real honor to be able to paint her and to be able to get to know her. As Judith said, whenever you're doing a portrait of someone, you have an opportunity to spend time with them, to get to know them in a very different way than if you were just meeting them any other way. And so I love that about the process, that connection that you create, that I'm able to have happen in my life because of what I do. It's a real something I love every day.
yeah, thank you. And I feel that that's why you capture the likeness so much of people, because you do take time to get to know them and to understand the story and the emotion or the feeling that you're trying to convey. And it just jumps off the canvas for me. So let's see if we have, it's always really fun if we get questions from our audience here. And I'm sure every time we do this, somebody has a question I hadn't thought of. So please. Question was, how do you feel about painting from life versus photographs? Anyone?
I would much rather paint from life. But years ago, all we had, if we weren't painting from life, was photographs. Now I can put photographs into my computer and my monitor, which at least gives backlighting to it, and it makes it much more like it's real. And so at least that's a good compromise. So
I paint from life when I'm teaching a workshop. But then I also shoot the model from each student's easel position and print a photograph. It's, for me, easier to get the drawing correct from a 2D rather than a 3D, but the photograph lies to you. And so you have to understand what you're missing if you're working from a photograph. And the way you understand that is by working from life. So because an example I often use is if I had a hat on and you took a photograph of me and it was casting a shadow over my face, in the photograph, my face might look black in where that shadow is. But if you were standing next to me, you would see skin tones. And that I learned that from Ted, this example. And you would see the skin tones, and that's the difference. There's the lie of the photograph versus life. The other thing is that you have reflected light. If I had a bright red shirt on, it would reflect up onto my face, and you would see it in my skin tones. And the photograph might compress that out. You might lose that. So having both to work from, having the photograph and life, which is, again, one of the reasons why I like to meet my people and photograph them, because I get a feel for who they are in a different way from life.
I would agree with everything that Robin just said. I've done a lot of life drawing. I love to do life drawing from a live model. And I think both of them are viable. Both working from photographs and working from a live model are viable ways to do good work if you do good work. And I think, and I agree with what Robin said, photographs lie to you. And if you study and learn how they lie to you and accommodate those things and correct those things. My big issue is that with what I paint, I'm after a moment of expression. That's what my paintings are all about, is a moment of expression. And I don't find that easy to do with someone sitting for me for 2 hours or something. So
when somebody sits for you, they really just settle into their face, right?
Right.
You know, they start to lose their energy, and and whereas in a photograph you get that spark, that moment. And so
often in a photo shoot, I will take 200 photographs of, in fact, most frequently I'll take at least 200 photographs, and I'll be lucky if I get 3 or 5 from 200 photographs that are that moment of expression and emotion that I'm after. And it's something they wouldn't be able to hold for 2 hours while I was, but also I think it's wonderful to work from a live model as well. I just think faces are wonderful, and either way. So
I would also add that when you're working from a live person, that person is constantly moving. And even if they're a really still model, they're always moving. And I can see the difference in my painting, because that movement gets translated into the brush strokes. I'm, maybe correcting something differently because they moved. And I do feel like that life can come through on the canvas in a different way than just from a photograph. And so I'm constantly looking, how can I incorporate that movement into a painting that's painted from a photograph? Because that movement is part of the life of the subject.
Can I say one more thing? The other thing is oftentimes working from a live model, getting a live model to come and sit for you for days and weeks and hours can get very expensive. And I think that's part of the reason why I do self-portraits. Sometimes I'm cheap.
I had to model once at the Scottsdale Artist School for a Robert Lemler, and
It was a mood modeling, was it?
no,
Yeah.
no, I was fully clothed. In fact, we were outdoors, which made it even more. It's really hard work to just sit there. I mean, it seems like it'd be really easy, but it's hard work to don't move. Oh, I have to scratch my nose. So yeah, I think that was a great question. Yes. Trying to get these on.
I love this conversation. This has been a terrific panel. Sticking with that moment of expression, I want to, I threatened to ask a doozy, but I'm going to go to Robin. I've been transfixed since you put out the photograph and the painting of this family, the mom, the daughter, and the son. And you talked about how you took multiple photographs and kind of moved them around so you would get the exact expression you wanted. And I've been looking at that mom since you put that out there. And you talked about how you wanted to capture the psychological expression of what she was thinking, what she was doing, and her. And she looks rather morose. I mean, she doesn't look, I know none of them, you didn't want anybody smiling, like everybody says, smile for the picture. But how would you interpret what you were trying to convey with that mother in that photograph, in that painting?
All right. Did you see the photograph? And did you think she looked like that in the photograph?
Yes.
Okay. I think she looks pensive and like she's thinking as opposed to morose. And what I would say is that when you think about portraiture through the years, people sat for long periods of time for paintings. You do not see historical paintings where people are laughing or smiling or showing you any teeth. It's because they sat for a long time and they weren't necessarily happy about that. And so the idea that I'm going for when I'm shooting is that they're sitting and they are thinking about something, as opposed to that they're giving me cheese or some other, like forced kind of look on their face. I'm looking for a look where I think they're thinking, and I feel like she looks to me. First of all, I think I said this is a work in progress, and I would say I've spent the least amount of time on the mother. So she's going to change a little bit. She'll probably get a little bit happier, but not much happier. Not much. And so, but I do think that that being able to have someone appear as if they are thinking, like there's something going on back there, and you as the viewer get to decide what they're thinking. This gentleman believes that she's being morose. Like which maybe that could be a, I think it's not a bad interpretation if you think about the idea that you hold on to your children for such a short amount of time, and that if they're, as they grow up, you have them for just this little bit of time. It's a very bittersweet thing. And so I don't mind that she's not just happier.
And I happen to know Erin, and she is a very introvert, quiet, madly in love with her children and her husband, but she is serious, almost stoic sometimes in her expression. But yeah, so now you have to come back and watch the rest of the progress.
I do really like her expression, by the way, too. This is very much what I wanted from her.
I can tell you what I think she's thinking. She's thinking, I can't believe how blessed I am to have these kids.
Yeah.
Can I share a story that has to do kind of with your, I should have thought of this when you were asking about meaningful paintings. I've been teaching at a location in Vermont for about 12 years now. I go there twice a year and teach. at this wonderful bed and breakfast place called Land Grove Inn. And I became really good friends with the owners, Tom and Maureen. And just this past year, Maureen passed away suddenly. And it was a heartbreaker for everybody that knew her. And to my surprise, Tom called me up one day and asked me if I would paint Maureen because they wanted a painting of her for her memorial service. Well, you can imagine how I felt. I mean, I was scared to death, and I wanted to do something beautiful. So Tom sent me 9 photographs, and they were all horrible photographs. And Maureen was not really a very happy person most of the time. She was not well quite often. And so I got I got 2 photographs. One of them, she had a pipe in her mouth. And I thought it was a great photograph. And I thought it would be great to do this painting with the pipe in her mouth, And Tom said, no, I want you to take the pipe out. I said, well, I can't do that. So there was another one where she was sitting at the beach, at her favorite beach in Virginia. And she had this kind of, not sad, but melancholy look on her face. So I went to work doing this painting, and a couple of very interesting things happened that really surprised me. I was painting along, I was getting toward the end, and I'm painting her mouth and her eyes. And I remember feeling something happen. And all of you guys can attest to this kind of thing that happens. You're painting and something comes, your intuition or whatever comes alive, and you have this feeling. And I had this feeling that I was making her look warmer than she appeared in the photograph. And I didn't even know exactly what it was. And I wasn't like turning the corners of her mouth up or something like that, So anyway, I had to do the painting fairly quickly. I shipped it to Tom in time for the memorial service. And the day that he got it, he called me. And as I answered the phone, he started to tell me that he got the painting and he couldn't talk. And he couldn't find his voice. And then finally, the first thing he said to me is, "You made her smile." And I wasn't really even aware really that I was doing that. And of course, that was a lovely, lovely thing, a great experience.
Good questions.
I would add that my daughter was engaged to this man, and he was in the service, and I had photographed him before he left to go to Afghanistan. And I just had a feeling that I was going to be doing a posthumous painting of him. And he was killed in Afghanistan. And when we found out, I went into the studio and I painted. I did the painting in about 2 days. And it was I felt like he was sitting there with me while I was painting. It was a very spiritual kind of experience. And I do think that there is a lot of spirituality in this practice, because you are channeling people's spirits. It can get very woo-woo in terms of what I experience anyway.
Yeah, you're not just doing stick figures. You're doing human beings. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, my question is directed to Judy because I've always loved all the costuming, the historic dresses, and please just tell a little bit about that because those are the children paintings I love.
So a good part of what I paint is more Western type of paintings. I think that's what she's referring to. And so those we have to envision ourselves, and we have models, but then I've got to create the atmosphere for it, the lighting for it, all of that, and then paint that. So that's really fun, creative. In Africa, mostly the paintings are from just quick shots that we take. We take hundreds of them And so then certain ones that'll just touch my heart, or I might combine several, and that's how that'll come out. The two little twins up there, we were doing a photo shoot for the family where I painted the whole family, but I had brought those dolls, and the twins were just so cute, whispering to each other. And so when I took the photo, I'm like, okay, I've got to paint this because it just touched my heart.
And you have some beautiful models that are your granddaughters.
Yes, I love painting my granddaughters and my grandsons. I have two paintings over there of grandsons, but yeah, Superman. And my grandkids, they're so used to being painted since they were born that they're like, okay, Grammy, and I get them to model in the water or whatever, but maybe someday they'll change. I don't know.
They don't know that you're an international rock star. Yeah, they'll figure it out one day. So, well, we're running short on time. Unless there's one more question, I think we need to kind of wrap up. So I want to thank Judy, and your studio is over here on the south side on the outside wall, about halfway down. And Ted is on the north tent. For those of you directionally challenged, it's that way. And on the outside wall. And I don't know your studio numbers because that was a long time ago. And then Robin, we kind of have to keep her in the corner. So the first row goes down the corner, and I do encourage you to go see their work in their studios, and I'm sure you'll have more questions. And I just want to thank you guys so much. It was so great, excellent information, and excellent crowd today. Thank you so much. And what is next week? Anyone? Something great. It'll be, folk art fascination. It's going to be wild. Tim Weldon and Timothy, did I just say Timothy Weldon and Terrell Powell? Yeah. Get ready to laugh for sure. But I don't know. It'll be great, whatever it is. We'll have fun. But you guys are the very best, and I thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.